and Labor is happy to represent them.
Call Simon O'Connor.
That the question be now put.
I'll hear Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I'm happy to take a call on this part 2 of the legislation. In particular, want to talk around the transitional provisions and the rates that are going to be paid in there. And I want to talk about those rates and what they mean and some of the consultation that happened with other government departments. And if we have a look at this, I think what we find embedded in the regulatory impact statement that lays out what other government departments had to say about this is the real agenda here, and how the rates that we see set out in this piece of legislation are not intended to stop with young people. It is not intended just to be a youth rate, and it's quite alarming to read through these when we look at what these rates might be. If we have a look at the Treasury comment on this piece of legislation and the youth rates that are in here, the Treasury said that they supported the introduction of a starting out wage, but considers that extending eligibility to a wider group of potential employees who face labour market entry barriers would boost the employment impacts of the policy and also be better aligned with the government's welfare reform agenda. So there we have it in very bold type from the Treasury in terms of their comments on this. This is not a piece of legislation that is about giving young people a start in the workforce. It won't work. We know that. The government members opposite are even given up arguing that it might achieve that. But this is a piece of legislation that is about driving down wages. This is a piece of legislation that is nothing to do about raising wages, about raising standard of living and raising the kind of life that New Zealanders can have in New Zealand. Then we had the Ministry of Education's comment. And let's remember, this is a government that talks big about innovation-led economy, about how we're going to have this future that's based on investment. Well, let's have a look at the stark reality of what the Ministry of Education had to say about youth rates. The Ministry of Education notes that the starting out wage may impact on the incomes of students who are working part-time while studying or working full-time during school or tertiary holiday periods. This may impact on students' ability to finance their current or further tertiary study. Well, Mr Chairman, this is stuff that is really worrying to us here on this side of the House. This is not the way to have the better New Zealand that we want to have. If we put this together not only with the welfare reforms that the Treasury pulled our attention to in the previous comment, but let's put this together with this government's lack of commitment to us having an innovation-led economy in terms of postgraduate allowances. How are the rates that are prescribed in this legislation going to allow someone to study full-time postgraduate study, not have access to allowance, have to supplement their loan, but only be able to earn $11 an hour? Let's have a look at the people that might be doing it. Postgraduate students, very likely to have families to support, very likely to have other people that their income is going to need to support. And this legislation is going to undermine our ability to have more and more people gaining the qualifications that will make us a better country, that will deliver us higher paying jobs, and it will lift the aspiration above minimum wage jobs that the opposition seem obsessed with and think that it is only minimum wage jobs that young people should aspire to. Well, we here on this side of the House actually want something better for our young people, something better than the $11 that is prescribed in this Act. Let's continue through the regulatory impact statement. Let's have a look and get some more of what the Ministry of Education had to say. The Ministry of Education is also concerned that the starting out wage, i.e. the rates described in Part 2 of this bill, the proposal is at odds with the government's better public service targets of increasing the proportion of people attaining NCEA Level 2 at school, and also the proportion of the population with at least Level 4 qualifications aged between 25 and 34. Again, how does this tie in with the great rhetoric we hear from this government, it doesn't, because this is a government that isn't about raising the standard of living of ordinary New Zealanders. This isn't a government that is about getting more people. This is not a government that is about backing our young people. Mr Sabin seems to think he can meet with a couple of... Mr Chairman, I thought you were about to ring the bell. Mr Chairman, Mr Sabin seems to think he can meet with a couple of his constituents, match them up with an employer, and hey presto, we've solved the problem of youth unemployment. Well, Mr Sabin, 41,500 young New Zealanders are unemployed. 90,000 young New Zealanders are not in any form of education, employment or training. You cannot solve this in your electorate office. This requires a political solution, and one that this government is failing at because they are out of ideas and have nothing to offer except for the youth rates that they're offering in here. But what we have is a government that will not face up to the fact that they have not put forward any solutions. And then we have a look at what it is that Moby came in and said. And this is the one piece of advice that the government has latched onto. Well, National have latched onto this and claim that the starting out wage will create, based on these rates that are prescribed in Part 2 of this Act, that they're saying it will create 2,000 new jobs for young people over 2 years. And this is based on the modelling and the estimates that Moby gave them. But it doesn't take into any kind of account the kind of jobs and at what expense. Now, this is probably the same kind of modelling that's coming up with this number of 2,000 jobs, the same model perhaps that told us we were going to have 177,000 new jobs, and this government has failed to deliver on. This government is willing to preside over increasing unemployment and, more shockingly and disturbingly, preside over increasing youth unemployment. We are at the level of Greece and Spain and Portugal when it comes to youth unemployed for 15 to 19-year-olds. We are at 30.9%. We on this side of the House will not bury our heads in the sand. We know that we have to do something about that, and you need real solutions. Tinkering around with the rates such as are prescribed in this piece of legislation is going to do nothing to fix that. This is an absolute disgrace that this is all that this government cannot come up with. And then if we turn to to clause 6 of this piece of legislation, which is around the ACC compensation and how it interacts with this. All this legislation is doing is it's a cost-out model. Health and safety, workplace health and safety training is going to be put at risk under this legislation. We are setting up an employment model that encourages employers to have a high turnover of employees. Put it together with the 90-day legislation and you have all the incentives in the world for employers to keep turning and churning through youth employees and paying youth rates. Because one of the things that this government needs to own up to is that this is a perpetual piece of legislation for our young people. They don't just get subjected to youth rates once. This is not a starting out wage. This applies until the day that you graduate in age to an adult wage. This is not about giving young people a start. This is not about solving youth unemployment.
The time has come for me to leave the chair for the dinner break. This debate is interrupted. I shall resume the chair at 7:30.